Everything we do in life is through all levels of pi. Processing the intelligence, processing the initial lines of points, and that positions of programming your systems lines in high calculate and modify through its intelligence. We identify how we see ourselves, knowing exactly everything we do is movement of pi. And that communications, we have to get beyond the measure and scale of its positions to understand how to use that in directions and redirect our systems through calculations of pi. Of pi, for pi, directing of communications of pi, line signals of pi over lines of square roots over pi, directing lines and length lines over pi, plus over angles over pi. There's so many ways to see it, and communication lines over lines of screen lines adaptations of pi. Pi is a central setting of movement that processes our mobilities, that puts our positions in the body of its movements. How we process that position is knowing exactly how to go through line calculations. Our bodies are just more controls of frames through windows, guys. You have to truly understand how to use that instructions. So identify these things is understand how to go through pi surf. Surfing the engine, surfing the net. How to get in that line screen adaptation system. How to get balance of the equilibrium. It's like being on a surfboard and trying to balance communication where you're going through pi. Okay, to and from. Pi is from here to here. Okay, what did I do from here? 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 And what did I do from here? All through pi. Pi central lines and position lines alpha, beta. Now that can be anything of theta and omega. Okay, that's pi. Now how long did you take? Let's split that in lines of anomaly. You're splitting space and you're splitting time right away, adding more lines of sync locations. Turn it into a fan. Process lines, echo, sonar, and directions and locations. Set positions, echo, sonar, and direct location setting. Processing through pi. So how we coordinate that is all through graph of screen lines, of webbing screen lines, of communication lines of pi. Right? There's always a different looking of calculation setting to see it in all through traction, all through direction. Because it's nothing of a webbing system that you have to understand in settings. Just a web, that's all it is. But each window, okay, goes through pi. Okay, your central settings, pi represent timelines, high centers to calculate screen locations. Everything is directions, is sky routes, sky lines, sky positions, sky nets, sky rotations, sky panels, and sky surface in location. Inside rotation, inside travel. In this window, frames and travel communications. Okay, space time. Observation lines, 1 over lines of setting and sequence. Everything's the storyline, course, centers, and direct lines of communication. Overlooking all the communication through pi, tango, tango, foxtrot. On center line sequence, pi generation lines, solar systems. Setting lines is the location of 3 centers in scale. Over communications, go to the next window. Process line condition lines over lines of pi, course centers, directing lines of link. Observing location setting through pi generation lines of screens. Over. Setting position lines of pattern, process lines of rainbow. Tango, tango, foxtrot, ongoing conversation lines of link. Popping uniform, directing line, Oscar November. Setting lines, communication, convergence system, off the attractions. Directing ground centers, online sequence into square root over its communications. Over. Setting to next window. Okay, so see what I'm doing with different lines of calculation of windows, right? I'm observing on different lines of windows in real time. That processes the indication system, all the attractions. In directions, online centers to its dimensional set position. 2 doors, direction, timelines. So once you understand the window frames, you understand the pixelation graphs, snowy graph interference, waving screen locations, black and white, black and white, black and white. Okay, move over to the next window and set travel. So you're constantly moving from one window to the next. Okay, and then you understand what you're doing to the windows through pi. Process the indication system all through travel and connection. Okay. Now, as you're going through that, let's go through 3 central line connections, a 3 conversion system all through pi, 1 Earth rotation. That's the Earth. You're using the lines of 3 lines of the settings. Process indication number 12, 3, 6. Let's start with that. Sets position lines of 15 minutes, 12 settings in position of 3. Sets travels. That's 15 minutes through pi. And travel communications. Quarter units, calculate minimum pi. Set lines position over 3, over 5, over 6 through pi. So what you're creating is a propeller, a solar engine, a solar traction, a solar line connection setting, a convergence system, a panel operation line connection, a lotus, a flower. Set calculation lines into Earth through pi. There's your Earth. Indicate lines as screen lines, adaptations of flux. Process that indicates the setting of solar disk through line condition setting. The disk lines the rotation of its cycle through pi. Indicate positions, process lines of direct centers. Projections over screen, projections over flux, projections over line settings, and projection on line screen adaptations of travel, all through pi. So this is all through a dimensional sail, through pi itself. Okay? So set the solar winds, solar track communication, its convergence system into its equilibrium that processes the transition over transactions through pi. What are you seeing through the central setting? Your Earth itself and solar system. Okay, that's just one graphing screen. And it's all done, all levels of triangulation. Okay? So it's very powerful when you start recognizing what you're doing through flux, through pi. Okay, through alpha, beta, okay, theta, and omega. Now you can use that line screen adaptations any way and form, any line position lines of travel. But it's all central line communication setting. Once you set the convergence system, it's all identified through Earth. Set lines of travel and direct lines of link that applied to its location system all through conception. Okay? And then you bring it in. And set position its time reactor. Time reactor sets the tonal lines, operates lines of sequence, platitude location system, and Fibonacci, directing on ground centers of space-time lines of measure and scale. Indicates position lines of calculation screen location setting. Process indication setting and travel. So one thing you guys have to modify is processing your settings how to basically see a box. Okay, see the box, but you see it on corners through pi. Okay, then you see it on panels. Then you see it above, and then you see it below. Okay, now it comes in longitude and latitude. Longitude and lines of latitude on the same arrows of indications. Same directions, all through volume. So we get a zero correlations, I have zero traction in location, right? Computer operation lines of setting, 4 lines of sequence, 3 lines of measure. 3 line signals, 4 set calculations, 5 generation screens, 6 over screen, 7 over line positions set calculation. Now, directing that line, process line to indicate high centers, process lines and online centered line sequence, 5 generation lines into square root, into rectangle and enforced line. Directing ground centers, change the switch, time frame, time calculation times pi. Process indicates the line condition setting, sets all position of its compass, over line signals, over lines of 4, over 7, over 6, over 8. Setting travel as a point lines graph over 3 over measure, over scale, and communication lines of 9, over set location lines, infinity 8. Setting point lines of course centers, 4 lines of settings, 4 7 lines of travel. 4 centers of travel, 7 lines of measure, 7 lines of correlation, 7 lines of traction, 7 lines of position, 7 operation lines of 3 travels and communication. All through indication lines, a center course system through pi, in directions and operation lines set and travel communication. So there's always a way to see all communication system all through movement of channels of pi. So I'm trying to get you guys to understand how to modify that lines and turn it into a webbing system through light and through the void. So we're going to coordinate through that line setting, the process your indication system, how you see it. Triangulation through pi, square roots through pi, circulations through pi, or a star mixture time frame through pi. Okay? Or lacing lines through pi. Okay? Or a percentage of pi. Okay? That's what you have to start identifying. And it's all done through your flash drive. It's all done through your keyboards. Everything is its own pi setting that indicates positions. So when you're looking at things, you have to look at up close what it is. There's an open signal. Okay? There's a down cross location. Right? So how you identify these things, okay? You can't travel through that. Pi has to be a clocking system together, an operation set. Now you can travel. So it's like figurating your system and configuration setting and travel and direct lines that you link, that your processing lines and positions of your open lines core centers. You get very confused if you're adding emotion lines and settings through alphabetical system, your calligraphies, or how you adapt your settings and open lines of communication. You have to close the panels, process lines, the indication lines, the clocking system has to be in convergence system over lines of tractions. Directing ground centers, now it can travel through a dimensional sail. So it's like having a hole in the sail. You can't travel. There's no wind, right? It's just going to flap, right, in position, okay? If there's a hole in the cell, you can't travel through it. All right? It'll just suck it in, right? It has to breathe out. So it has to process the time scale of what it's doing, all levels of bending space, and how the weather comes in all information sending it grounds an online sequence location of its pi. All right? So it's a process that position when you get in time frame, timelines, time communication, sending, committing, set. Let's go through an online track. Okay, so you can travel through that, right? Through arrows of indication. All right? Change the flux over screen. Cross lines indicate lines over the lines of north. Cross lines of east over west, over south, over north. Setting lines degrees, setting coordinates, set position lines alpha, delta, theta, 0, 1 traction. Okay? Codification lines at 8 tracks. Course centers lines at 0 over 1. Cross lines indication 1 over 2. Cross lines of delta formations. Crossing angles. Crossing symbolism. Cross line course centers of pi generates a screen location setting adaptation. Indicates course, embedded over line, rotation lines, high center line positions, alpha channels, delta, theta operates lines zeta, line conditions at gamma, set lines of radiation, course center transparent, translucent, and position of X-ray and travel. Inside rotations and travel calculation setting to Skynet. It's a lot of Skynet lines positioned through pi. So there's a lot of conditions of recourse that you can set position location settings through a capsule. Your story frame puts everything of pi itself, how it modifies the system, how you see it through Fibonacci. Fibonacci one way, Fibonacci other way. Process position creates the portal of Stargate as screen adaptation. Indicates grounds, online sequence, online communication settings and positions. This is where you have to really start thinking outside the box. High signals of travel. Create the storylines, self-tell the operation of remembering you, informations of no story. Operation lines, all lines of story itself that rotates the system, how you see it, and the spectacles of your planetary alignments that put you in position locations into 144 flux. So I'm a constant continuous flow as I keep moving through pi. Okay? So everything I'm doing, that's pi. Put my hand down, that's another pi. All right? Put it back up, that's another pi. So we have a circle line rotations. Let's start with an L-line track. All right? So we got levels. Okay? We got length, okay? So that's 2, right? Center operation of Fibonacci going this way and going the opposite way in tractions in direction, okay? Now, you have to understand how to convert this system. Let's set position lines of 12 or cycle. Set position as settings. Now, once we understand the communications of its pi itself, which is a 3-line communication setting of travel, then we can split line the space and time through its anomaly. Okay, once we understand that, then we go from position, then we understand what 1 is, then we understand what 2 is, and then we understand what 3 is, and then we understand what 4 is, and then we understand what 5, and then we understand 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 set tractions, all through pi. So you have to understand the position of the coordinates first, through its longitude and its latitude that puts length and width in travel. Now, in that position, now you can go from the lines of 12 over 2 over pi, right? And then position lines of 2 back over 12 over pi. Sets travels into 12 over lines of 3 over pi. And that position lines of 3 over lines of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 through partial accelerations of pi. Process indicates line, kinetic setting. Process lines of solar generation lines, platforms over line, equal line course centers into flux of communication lines of pi. Flywheel track communication lines, planetary alignments, line communication line, third lines of communication lines, and projections over pi, and set communications. Directing ground centers, online sequence, flux over 8, 9, set lines of 3, set line communications over pi. I'm saying everything over pi because I'm constantly moving forward. But I'm always in the now as I'm moving the connections to its dial. A dial has an indication system. If it's not, it's stuck in between. Now, the process of communication system is how you use the dials of information, the seconds, minutes, and hours that change the dials. The process of the center is always you moving yourself in all operation of the mind. It changes everything to its mind, imagination system that's direct and reset location setting through pi. That's a lot of condition settings all through tractions. Okay? So I'm just showing you how you can see location settings through pi communication and all different levels of solar systems and calculation. All right, so understanding time centers, we get a position of this. Basic understanding triangulation of pi, star direction of time pi, course centers into box frame of pi, solar lines, communication lines, circulation lines of pi, or anything a percentage of pi. And it's all connected, again, to your positions, how you use your keyboards. Everything is identification of its own system. Everything has its own movement. Everything has its own time and scale. Now, what we have to understand, let's get 4 rulers and directions of communications of pi. Okay? Ruler 1, ruler 2, ruler 3, and ruler 4. There's a frame, right? But you have to close the panels. Online signals don't have anything open through chance, or you can't travel through it. So it's like, let's say you get position of Tom, okay, and you're getting angry. So this is a T, this is an O, and this is an M. Okay? Now, look at the confusion here. See how you can't travel through pi? Because the T is open. You have to close the gap so you can travel through space and time, right? Let's go through the O, right? You're not identifying its own operation, so you're not identifying what you're doing in your minds because you're getting angry and frustrated, creating emotional lines of attractions. That's confusing line communications overriding you in locations of pi already. Okay, so you got to close the gap and set position. Now there's an indication lines over lines of signal, cross lines, position of flux over screen. Directing ground centers of box frame, course centers, lines of travel. Directing online centers, line communications position of 7 over sequence, setting communications. So I'm doing it just constantly adding frames through pi. All right, so that's the M, right? But M has a hook. So I have to change formation lines of grounds, allocate time frame, line center locations, allocate time frame locations, putting position lines of calculation, screen location setting, and travel. So indicating line settings puts everything in lines of balance, how we modify our systems and calculations. So you don't make mistakes in drawing if you don't identify what you already are in drawing. That processes your system, how to use yourself, all the calculation lines, and how it's set position location of Tom. So once you get in this position, you come in this position. Okay, all together, right? But even still, check the corners. That's open, can't travel through it. Now you can travel through it, right? It signifies everything in its own operation system. You can't leave open to anything of chance because you understand how to go through its own portal. Now, its own system, it knows exactly what it is through a 4, or what it is in set position to its platform, or what it is in location setting and travel to its chair. See, a 4 is a chair. So 4 equals lines, a chair equals lines into high position of H equals lines of 4 in set position. So directing ground centers on centers line communication setting sets lines of communication, right? What a 4 signal is position of its pi, travels, directions, operation, sequence. Okay, a mapping system, a mapping setting lines through pi in directions of coordinates and communication longitude and latitude. But it stays with inside the center of operation, okay, in directions. 3 centers of pi, 4 centers of set locations, 2/3 of pi, 3 centers of pi, 1/6 of pi, 1/8 of pi, 1/12 of pi, 1 center operation, 1 center, 1 communication lines, convergence set location lines of pi. Everything is pi through track location. How you identify the hours is how you identify the seconds, minutes, and hours in frames. So let's say you walk in a room. Okay, you're walking in a room. Let's get in simulation grounds, 2 panels, grounds and atmospheres. Okay, approximately 3 angles, set lines of 3. Okay. Now we set up the grounds, set up the panels, and trowel, okay? Then we set up the ceiling and set the position of its convergence system, all things set calculations, all right? Now, once you get in that position, you set up your panels again, operation lines, settings, 4 flux over screen, 4 flux lines of setting, 3 centers of travel, communication. Directing ground centers, you are in the center operation of your system, and travel calculations, okay? All right, so let's say you go from here to here. How long does it take you to go through pi? So that's 1 slice of pi right there, right? So you got 1/3 ground into 2 lines of screen. So you spent 1 hour on the phone, which is 1 year in space. So 1 hour on the phone is of pi, and over pi, okay, is 1 year in travel. Your central system is going through line signals of the seconds, minutes, and hours that you go through track position locations. Open all communications. How do you see everything of A? How do you see everything of B? How do you see everything of C? If A is identified to B, B has to identify to C, C has to understand D, and D have to understand E and travel. Okay, if A and B and C and D don't understand each other, there's no travel. You understand? So the clocking system is a 3 angles, which is your time frame of space, setting clock lines and communication how you see the sun line, 3 lines of flux, 3 lines of measure and scale, process of the moon, process of the sun. Online sequence through pi and set travel. 3 centers, operation line, set location, split lines anomaly again. Process indicates how you see the A equals lines of B, equals lines of C, equals lines of D, and equals lines of E. Cross lines, now it's all over the question, and 4 lines of flux and data formation setting and grounds lines of sequence. There's the balance. So it's interconceptual setting to the mind inception itself that adds the flux line communication, how we interline course centers and direct line communication to its mind inception, that intercourse the calculation setting to its waving screens that puts all position locations how you see your northwest, south, and east through pi and all direct locations. Okay. So building those relationships with your systems. Okay. So as you're going through a room, this is you. This is you right here. Okay, that's you, right? Now, each time you're going through pi. Okay. Now, what did you do? Through this, and this all at once. Okay, that's pi. Think of it that way, right? So you're going through, let's say we'll start with A, then we'll go with B, then we'll go with the C. That's your algorithm. Okay. So I'm just making it easy for you guys to understand. So if you understand 8 tracks, then you understand longitude and latitude. So all you're doing is bandwidthing your pi, and you're putting yourself into higher elongated systems of streaming in your positions, right? Now, once you understand A understands B understands C, and now you understand D. That's the volume, that's the mass now. Okay, so your process positions are going here, setting them as seconds, okay, stopping in frame. Stop here. Okay, take a break. Right? So what is that positions? Your walking line position, what? Let's say 1,200 steps. Okay? Now that's on earth line of pi. Now of pi is the opening, okay, of the foundations. Space itself is over pi, okay, which is operation, okay, of its formations. So you have to send the track communication lines to 2 convergent systems. Put process positions of 1,200 steps of pi into 12 million steps. That process set positions over pi in travel. Okay, that indicates the position and where you're going through the settings from here to there through pi. Okay, so it's all measure and scale, how you see it in platform of its webbing system through echo and sonar and communicates to its system. It's very powerful how you see it in all communicates to its convergent system to its webbing system of graph communication. And it's very powerful to understand that how you see an all formation setting of its Windows frames in travel. Okay? Because that's all it is. It's a webbing system. Okay? You know exactly how to go through dimensional sails of travel. And that position's a balance. And that position's a balance of yin and yang. Okay? So once you understand the pi line, then you have to understand the course of time that you're putting yourself in parallels. The position lines and 1 argument line, split lines, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. So that's embedded in 1 frame, 2 frames over 3 centers of 4 centers of travel. Okay, so that puts lines of 4 lines of sequence of travel. So you have a crossing path. That process indicates the setting over 2 track positions, set course centers in position. Line condition setting to its bridging system. There's the bridge. All right. All right. So you're here, but you're identifying what you're already done through pi. Okay, so you're already there, right? So that's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You already know. So you're precogging A, B, C, D, E, F, G of expanding your locations. And when you're expanding your locations, that changes everything through a platform through pi and a direct line sight of communications of the now. So it's like walking the plank in process of indication setting of 4 centers of travel, crossing angles and platforms in position location and high centers of travel, crossing angles into 3/4 and set line communication lines of travel, indirect lines of link at communication elongated screens. Directing ground centers, pi generate screen locations, sets lines of settings, process lines of indication system, all through converting in rotation lines of grounds, 45 flux of angles and travel communications in direction. Online signals on communication system in process calculations in direction. Now, understanding your position, this is where you have to understand your perimeters and your parameters and your secure line defense lines. The process indicates how you use yourself through your pyramids, through pi, actual projections, actual travels. Crosses, lines of symbolism, line corresponds to calculation. Gets more complicated if you understand how to see it and an infrastructure is designed through its locations. Puts all position lines of panel, process of indication. Okay? And you look inside this position, right? It's amazing how you see everything of a window in frame communication, right? Where you're here traveling through one center to another set locations, upline, center line conditions, over lines of pi, up pi, back in pi, pi line centers, back in pi generation of screen locations, jumping from timeline to different parallels at different windows of frames. It's that communication in your settings, all in travel. So look at the longitude and latitude you have in your infrastructure, your systems, how you can travel in all different angles through pi itself in seconds, minutes, metric, meters, or scale. So it puts you in communication setting to understand how to use your primitives in location. Each pi has its own pi. Each pi has its own generation of pi. Each pi has its own space of time of pi. So everything is pi. Okay, underscore, plus line, a line. Okay, so you have to understand, what does A identify through pi? What does pi identify through A? What does plus line identify A? What does plus line identify through P? What does the position of the line conditions of underscore mean? Or what does the subtraction mean? Or what does the addition mean? Or what does the multiplication mean? What does the square root mean? What does the star matrix of time frame? What does the box frame mean to pi in set positions? That's what you have to identify. So building that relationship, recourse is setting lines of direct and redirect, guys. It's amazing how you come into that through triangulations of setting through box frames through pi. Okay, so through pi is through transparent, translucent X-ray. Okay, of pi is the earth. Okay, over pi is space. Through pi, okay, is that position through, okay, connecting through internal and external force, seen in position of inside and outside and travel in operation lines of sequence, inside and outside at the same time. So that puts all calculated modified to your EST, okay? Your external, your sensories, and your position location, your settings through your travels. 3 centers of measure, pi generation lines and flats, indicates process lines and console communication setting and constellation setting and travel. Directing ground centers puts all communication with dimensional door screens. 3 centers of communications and pi generations, all through flux, all through pi. Door represent timelines, pi generation lines at one cycle, one center, one traction, one division, one locations. Okay, directing through lines, online centers, 3 line communication lines of pi. High centers have communication lines of high direct lines of pi. Movements over channels, online center, 3 centers of communication system. Merging line, directing line ground centers on communication setting and position of flux to pi. Process communication over lines of pi, under pi, correlations of pi, direct location lines of pi, sets communication lines of pi, interference line communication, directing line connections all through pi. Everything is pi, guys. Everything has to be pi, or you'll not be able to travel through pi through your body. Okay, it's very complicated. But complication is good, because through pi is knowing pi already. Now processing pi is the initial of itself. Right, so you understand what plus is, now you understand what negative is, and now you understand what equal is, now you understand what 1 is, now you understand what 2 is, now you understand what a box is, now you understand what a triangulation is, now you understand what a circle is, and now you understand what lacing lines are, all through pi. So how do we go through this set locations? Directing lines of triangulation over and cross lines of pi. Cross over lines of communication lines of pi. Indicates high centers over cross location lines of pi, cross lines of box lines of pi, corresponding lines of northeast west of pi, over lines of communication, over line signals, cross lines, communication 2 plus lines, direct lines of negative over pi, over 0 over pi. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. Putting your position lines of balance is knowing exactly how to go through the line connection of its clocking system and travel. Okay, so that puts you in some position of balance. The center operation of you never leaves the pi of setting. It's the imagination that creates the pi. Okay? That opens up all formation setting in all position location of travel through Fibonacci. So as you're going in that position, you're already creating lines of screen adaptation to systems all through flux, cross lines of indications. Now, see the open panel? Okay? You can't travel through that because it's still open. Right? It has to be a full circle of clock. or you cannot travel. Okay? That means you have to change the particle acceleration lines of screens, directing lines of grounds, online center, online communication, on positions, off center, sent line communication, recharge, mechanism lines, communication, all set position, all through tractions. Change the course centers, change time frame communications, convergence. Directing on centers, on sequence, set course centers, and set location. Okay? Communication lines that ground 3 centers of flux. Process line connections, satellites, modem, Wi-Fi, setting line, rotation line conditions, sending your satellite. Boom, done. There's your satellite. So how do you coordinate that? It's how to use the satellite through pi. Through pi. Understanding through is understanding transparent, translucent, X-ray. Okay? Understanding of is the earth line of opening through pi. All right? So you have to understand how to coordinate in longitude and latitudes, understand the streaming, how to indicate that, and how to use that through your time, your body, and your flux capacitor. Okay? So it's process how you see the box, triangulation. Okay? Does that look like a box triangulation? No. But where's the box? The box is in the center, and the triangulation's here. It's that position. I don't need to show you this, but that's what it is. And you bring it in. Triangulation box through pi. See, you got to get out of what you don't know and get out of what you already know. And how to identify that is how to see it through projection of light and how to see it location of its void. How to bring it all together through pi of infinity 8. Rotate the cycles, change formation lines at grounds, on center, on sequence, on communications. Flux over screen, flux over an anomaly, and rotation lines of setting. Your process of indication, your whole life is based on all of us, how you come in that position of its conversion through calculation setting, right? You have to come out of the box. You're not just here to look inside the box. You're here to identify what's also outside the box. So this is expanding, this is expansion. Okay? So once you understand the expansion, you're expanding and expansion at the same time. You're coming to higher levels of growth, a more spiritual system of technology. You're advancing your systems through outlines of pi. That process indicates what you already know of calculations of pi. That indicates the center operation of you, puts you in all position location of extending your system all through settings of pi. Okay? Pi is a lot of fun, all right? But the intricate is so complicated through its structure of design line that's set up through its schematics, all through communications of pi itself. And you formate the system, there's a face recognition, okay? Now, what you guys have to start identifying is never have anything open in panel. It has to be closed in signal, which means you have to have a full clocking system, right? But check that in that lines of setting because it offlines its positions, right? So don't have anything open signal because you cannot travel through a particle acceleration. Triangulation here. Okay, can I travel through that? No, because look, 3 central lines are open. 2 bottoms of flux, 1 over frame, right? They're open, they got to be closed. Or you cannot go through clocking of pi. You have to identify these things. In longitude and latitude, your docking stations, guys, okay? Don't have anything open. Always have position because this is what puts you in position confusion through motion. Time frame lines, high center line communications. Writing in that position. Writing your name. Calculate screens. All right. General, right? And set position lines of high centers and locations. General, right? So puts position lines of setting all through calculations. Writing in scripture or printing in setting. So look at this in set position. Okay. What do you see in that lines? 8 lines of setting. See that? There's a face. See the face? Okay, there's the neck. Okay, very powerful how you see the 8, but you see the 2 line set lines that communicates its position, puts all calculated and modify. Now, if I create the body, you see the formation setting of its intelligence. Boom. Right? There's always intelligence, everything you get a name from, title frame, communication lines of anything in the set positions. There's always a face, but the face itself has to be a full correlations of a clocking setting. Nothing can be left to chance because it offlines your positions through your emotional setting of attraction. Okay? So if you set that position, you can travel through that, but you cannot travel through this because it's open panel. Okay? So this puts you in motion lines of tractions. Two lacing lines, offline setting. See, there's a split there that communicates conversion of separation. You're separating the tither, you're separating the server and the provider to its messaging location setting. All right, offline, combustion over line communications in position that creates all levels of information. Off centers, okay, modify mapping screens, directing lines, and volume. Process communication over cross-line connections and convergence system all through PI communication. On centers, on direct line communication set, offline setting position. Okay, so signify, put a line signal, process line indications, go back through PI. Process here, that's fine, right? This, not fine. You can't travel through that because every time you're going through PI, you're going through a clock. See, this is what you're creating through a clock. Okay, you're creating a portal so you go through a Stargate. So if the clocking system is not in balance, it's off position with its time frame. All right, so the clocking system has to go to the center of how many PIs it's going through in the seconds, minutes, hours, and frame. All right, so let's say you got a 24 clocking system into a 48 line centers of frame, 72 computer operated lines, 144 into where you are at 344 flux. Okay, so where are you in line screen adaptation of center? Are you calculating modified through 3 screens? Or are you in direct lines off course centers at 24 scale? Process indicates lines of settings. Process line indicates in set positions. If you get operating line screen, set the flux line back and set operation. 3 centers of operation line condition setting. You guys refer as the peace sign in set position. That is your failsafe. You go back to your failsafe, process lines at 12, sets position 24 in center, sets course centers at 48 lines of 1, sets lines of 72 over 2, 48 over 3, sets 3 over settings, 3 over 4, 7 interactions, question, 4 centers that communicates lines of data, that indicates positions all levels of the now, that processes the clocking system all through over lines of pi of clocking setting. Very powerful stuff in set lines of sequence inside travel. Okay, inside of you, observing you, inside you, what's going on through pi. The mirror. All right, so it's the mirror inside the eye itself, the process communication system. Okay, I really like to get into the mirror because everything we create is a pi itself, but nothing can travel until you understand the open panels of your systems and calculation of its eye itself. That's the eye within the eye of the eye itself, of the mirror that puts you in mirroring yourselves and set travel. Okay, now identifying the coordinates of what's going on in that position is how to modify your systems and calculations, how to see that in lines of calculation screens in its teleportation vessel and travel. Okay, cut lines, directing lines, online settings, on positions. Go through triangulation, resetting line communication position of its convergence system, all through calculation setting. All right, but it's amazing how you see the central eye of the eye itself through the windows of the soul, because everything is in process positions to its intelligence. Pi itself, processes positions all through traction. So what you guys have to identify is how to create a portal through a star clocking setting, a location to its position that sets and aligns the convergence system all through a clock. The clock has to have a router that locates the router that position its metric meter and scale of balance. So in that position, you start with this setting, clocking 1, clocking 2, clocking 3, clocking 4. Set lines of pi set up, right? Now, you can set through triangulation, or you can set through a box in that positions. Okay? All right, so that's 4 central line connection setting. You have a convergence system, box frame, direct and redirect and set settings. Process indication north, set position north, north, and north. Let's start with that tractions, right? Then we record the time frame, box frame, triangulation, and correlation settings. Data formation lines, box frame, correlation, window frame, and travel. Inside line condition setting sets convergence system all through calculation setting and stream. Directing on centers, ionospheres, correlation spheres, track spheres, communication spheres, directing spheres, operation spheres, and set position of spectrum spheres, all through your Earth. Earth is rotating in all signal locations all at once through pi. The center course system has a flux line, 3 centers of travel. It says correlations as set lines of 6 lines of travel, 9 lines of travel, 12 lines of travel, 24 lines of travel, that position lines of calculation. Directing inside location lines of its connection system all through set position, its operation. Inside through pi. Time reactive center operation lines of setting, process indicates the system to its flower. See the flower? Directing inside, there's the stem. Process inside line conditions settings convergence. Inside location of the system all through track communication. Okay? And understand these underlying rotations is processing how to use the intelligence inside the eye itself. So if you understand the clock, then you understand why you have to get in position of the portals and stargates. Okay, so it's all the angle points where you come in position, where you start to bend space, time, edit space, time, lock space, time, free space, time, edit space, line conditions, and convergent system. But you have to understand the clocking system, how to center operator settings, 3 centers of measure. Start with that, right? Starts with the seconds, minutes, and hours and frame. Okay? Split lines of anomaly, and center lines of travel, right? So that's 1, 2 graphs and 3 centers of measure. Okay? That's 3 graphs and 4 lines of measure. Okay? Okay, now we get position lines of setting. So this is 2 third graphs and 1 lines of measure. Sets course centers into 1/6, 1/8, 1/12, 1/24 in position all through pi. So that overrides the pi in position of its void itself. On centers, locate of sonar, echo line screen adaptations of flux. Process indicate line conditions, embedding screen adaptations of process calculation. Directing ground centers, online center location to an XT1000, process through pi. Directing ground centers, 4 lines of flux into pyramid activation lines of communication lines over Rhine state locations lines of pi. Through pyramid activations, process lines of communication lines, 3 lines of flux over pi. Process indication lines at 3 centers and communication lines of calculation lines through pi. Everything's pi of travel. So you have to understand the grounds of pi, the panels of pi, and the ceilings of pi. Box, window, frame. Okay? Inside rotation to the eye itself. The process that indicates the settings of what it's doing in travel communication to its clocking system. Okay? Now, elongating your streaming takes you out of pi itself. This is thinking outside the box. And that's what you want. But you can't get out of the eye division. The eye division is all levels of how you see yourself. All you're doing is expanding the eye division location with spectrum, how you see that in position. Right? So elongated setting from here to here, set position here to here, process here, solar sail on both directions. Triangulation flux, process lines indicates the line conditions and a convergent system all through travel. So it's very complicated how you see it in all formations of itself. So as you turn the eye turns the time frame, change the panels, change the particles, change the acceleration, change the positions, all through setting. So every time you change the formations, your eye is constantly changing in its formations of grounds, powers, and adversaries all at once. So it's very powerful how you see it in all formation setting and all through flux. Okay? And you start to recognize how to use it in all window frames. As you are observing everything that's going on in that position. All right? That's you right now, see? That's you right there. So you can put yourself anywhere you want, but it's all about understanding the central eye, the eye itself, the spectrum of the eye, the correlation lines of the panels, the scepter of the eye set positions, the cerebral cortex of the eye, line communication, expanding its settings, understand the operation line setting and sequence, in position to its echo, screens, adaptations, ethers, cores, ferments, and line positions, and set track locations. All right? That's what you're constantly doing as you're moving through the set lines. You're creating different lines of pi that generates the screen locations and what you're doing through flux. Okay, and set tractions, all through set position of its operation. Okay, all activity, all mobility, it goes to the eye. But you have to understand how to create the portals of clocking systems. You can overlap the system at 3 centers of angles. That's totally fine, right? Then you have to check the loops in that positions, right? So you got set lines of 1 central line. You got a position lines of 2 central lines. You got a positions of 3 central lines. And you got a position lines of 4 central lines of communication. Okay, so never think that you're in positions and settings until you understand the depth and the mass of volume of portals of calculation through pi. because you see the convergence system all through travel in all directions through a mapping system and track location and simulation. Okay, and it's all identified here. You see that in its spectrum. Trigonometry is the trigger. 3 centers, offline, inside. And that line communication has convergence. Now, directing lines of link. Quasar is the quantum self, how to use the laser lines. Process lines of indication lines of 4 lines of flux, 3 centers of measure, over scale, over attractions, over divisions, over locations. Okay? Laser is just a communication system, how to lace the lines of bedding systems and travel through its building. Process lines of 3 centers indicate windows, frames, and travel communications. Directing ground centers in structure of design line and screen locations. 2 side line position offsetting, inside rotations, ground centers, and pyramid activation 1 is set travel communication. Off centers, process lines of 45 angles, and process calculation lines of simulation graphic communication. Setting ground centers, change the flux over lines of windows, frames, and travel. Directing lines of geological, geographical system into high course centers at calculation screen locations. Inside position lines of settings, indicate positions all through pyramid activation again, and set position of 4 settings of angles, and set travel. In embedding screen location. On centers, on positions on panel, indicate line centers of panels, operation lines of setting, lacing lines inside rotations and travel. Inside rotation and set, calculate, modify. Set in operation line settings and sequence locations inside travel. Okay? Setting operation lines as center and rotation lines as Fibonacci that rotates the systems and calculates lines of pi. Setting travels and communications in its convergent system. Okay? The process of the eye, guys, is how to understand how to seed and projection that perceives everything of consciousness that what you're bringing in. But you have to modify the eye itself of what's going on in its seconds, minutes, and hours through its pi, through its quantum, or through its trigonometry. Trigonometry is just a trigger line. It's a core lines like tripping over wires, and not understanding the indication lines, position of 4 box frames, not understanding tripping in position, your inside lines. You got a leg here and you got a leg here. Okay, that's trigonometry. You're here, but you're tripping over here. So there's a wire indicating, right? So you trip the wire, he set it off. Security breach. Off position, right? So how we understand it is the alteration of its ego. Process and that position location is knowing exactly seeing these things before getting in that position through pi and travel. Knowing you see the position of its open window, and you're not even there yet in travel communications. You already see the 4 lines of flux of what's in 3 lines of windows. You already keep setting to the other side line communication setting, which is space. That's how you see both settings and both line communications convergent system of center operation. But the center operation changes the flux how you see pi of indication setting to travel, all through direction, right? Now you can change an information setting, but you're seeing the teleportation lines at different levels through volume and mass, and understand how to see it through its equations. All through the eyes, all through spectrum. Okay? So once you understand that, it's kind of like doing this, 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 it's kind of like doing this. Kind of like going around like this, you know? Well, it's kind of like rotating your eyes. Going this way, going that way, doing this, going here, going there, going back and forth, up and down. Like, you know, you just, and everything's just, you see, the farthest you go, you see everything plasma. Blink your eyes like this. You start to see the pi colorations of all lines of signal all at once. Formation lines and coloration lines of 12 centers. Let's start with sign lines of position of 12 over set lines of 2 over 3, 3 over 6, 3 over 9, 9 lines of 8, lines of 7, lines of 12, ag line communication of 24 scale. Okay, sets communication lines of pi, split lines of anomaly. So when you're splitting pi, you're splitting space-time. Okay? Now, if you want to coordinate the communication line centers lines of travel, create a dimensional solar cell, you can outline signals, outline structure, outline communications and setting, and bend space. That's bending space. Now you can particleize the system that travels in direct lines of inside outline communication with clocking. Bound the clocking system behind lines of travel, directing ground centers to the eye central lines of travel. Change communication of convergence, taking the eye, set positions going this way, that way, going this way, going that way, going this way, on this way with this locations, going this way in tractions, going this way in tractions, find where it's going with the eye. in its all directions all at once, all through flux. Okay, all through setting, all through pi. Okay, so you're converting your systems back in set, position, operation, setting. The process indicates the system how you see it, lines of the eye division that change the eye spectral. The spectrum lines, part of acceleration, set lines of operation, set lines of grounds of operation. Okay, eye centers of this way, 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 inside rotation. Let's start with that, right? And everything's happening in the center point. Okay, that sets position here. Okay, and that settings, change that, set location, sets position here, because your eye can be anywhere it wants. Your eye can be anything it wants to be, because all it's doing is changing everything of its machination of tunnel, defense, positions, operation lines, and set calculate lines. I just hand out formulate, simulate in that position location to its eye. There's the expanding. Expanding out all through pi. Okay? How to coordinate that through pi, central lines of pi, communicates interference of pi, direct line calculation lines of pi itself off the web. So you turn your eye into a web and part of acceleration setting in space and time. You change your eye in a planet and set travel communications. You change your eye in a solar system and set travel communications. You change your eye in a triangulation, set positions through pi and set travel communications. There's nothing you can't do through the eye set position and its operation. But you have to truly understand what you're doing because you're adding face of recognition. See, there's the face of recognition. Boom, right there. Face there, face there, face there. 3 faces in one. Your facades are very important to your space-time anomaly. 3 centers of calculation setting, all through flux. Okay, start with that. So how many times do I need to understand A to know I've already done D? Okay, but I have to modify C first to understand what I've done through B. Okay, so it's all lines to direct and redirect. Okay, direct in this way, not this, in that position. No, that. All right, so 2 error points together and 2 error points inside, outside. So we got this way, start with that position, right? And they have 1 indicates in 1 arrow. Okay, and then we can change the arrow of indications. And we can add flux line. There's 3 central lines of communication of clocking through pi, right? Sets coordinates, communication lines of flux over pi. So you're constantly changing your eyes. And central communications creating different levels of pi. Rotating lines in location like you see plasma around the eye itself. So it's part of the lines of settings. Going around the system lines of calculation system. And as you go faster and faster, you're going through your 12, 24, 48, 72, and 144, all through the eye. Whoa, my goodness, that looks like a part of acceleration system now, all through a flower. That's right. The flower becomes its tree and set lines of communications. The tree of life. Lotus, flower of direction is a time frame, process line communication system, puts all lines of your life force, puts everything all together through pi. All in setting, all through operation. Okay? The tree of life. So once you route the routers, correlates the calculus lines, the eye line direct location setting to a spectrum, direct lines of ground communications positions. The eye itself becomes the roots of setting. Okay? And 3 centers of travel. Once it comes to 3 centers of travel, it has a direct line link. Then it process lines of 4 lines of travel. Okay? Once it sends 4 lines of travel, it understands position lines of 5 centers, process lines of 7 over lines, 12 line positions, 24 scale of communication lines of travel, direct lines of link and communication. High course lines, calculate and modify, direct line I course, cataracts lines of center, operating center, and frequency locations through pi generation. Directing ground centers on center, process lines of triangulation over lines of box frame, triangulation over lines of off line center location, and position location with position. 3 centers of communication setting, instruction line, division location system. All through traction south locations. Okay? Creating the infrastructure of your building through the eye itself. There's the eye, look in the spectrum of its eye. Outside the setting, outside the spectrum, outside the scope, periscope, teroscope. What do you want to see in position microscope? Any of the information setting is creating its bridging that crosses everything location system, how you see in the perspective through pi of a structure that's coming outside the eye line center at sequence locations. Okay, you see it in all different angles, right? all through flux, through the eye itself. So you got to structure the eye, understand the eye, and its set positions are what you're doing through travel. And the structure comes in set locations, and it outlines the systems and an online center rotation of itself. Process in the indication system knows exactly what's going on through communication of pi. Okay? Or space of pi. Now, space of pi is longitude and latitude, guys. So I don't want you to get confused. You're losing, you process your position of opening. Now you're getting in a position of operation now. Okay? So, getting position out of space. Okay? In space, out of space. Going back in space. Okay? Triangulating through 8 central lines of space. Okay? Processing that lines at all different angles through communication lines, the center of operation lines of space. All through particle acceleration, all through time. Okay? Put you in positions, all through center operation. Directing ground centers, sets position location of ground setting line communication setting 144 flux. There's the central lines in a crop circle, looking down line, shift lines in the eye itself. It's set communication and its convergence system, back in frame and travel. 3 centers of communication setting, convergence system locations, add in the pyramid and rotation lines of 4 lines of flux over screen. Very complicated how you look through the eye itself, through spectrum of light interaction. Okay? The eye itself. Okay? And all different levels is set position. So what does your eye turn into? Antikyrian, a 140 flux, a teleportation vessel. Okay? Powerful stuff when you start to recognize what's going on with the eye itself. It's that position. Whoa. Now, if I understand the recourse, directing online center on center, then I have to understand the clockings of 3 first, which is this space and time. So it's 12:15 coming into 12:20 into 12:30 in travel communications. Now, I have the central line course centers of direction and redirect the line communication clocking system. Go one way and the opposite location setting that converts the systems off the settings. Create the anomalies. There's a part of acceleration of your setting through Saturn. Creating Saturn into the spectrum of light. All through spectacles, all through set positions, all through travel. Whoa, right? So there's so many ways. There's longitude and latitude of streaming itself to understand how to get in position, how to see it through projection, how to see it through light, and how to see it through light shades and shadows of the void. Understanding longitude and latitude and set positions, guys, how you're seeing this, all through its perspective. Okay, in its dimension, 12th dimension, 24th dimension, 25,000 dimension, any dimension you want in position locations that put you in position how you see through the eye center of its eye itself, that puts you in all communication setting to your pyramid activation system. Booyah! Of your earth and center operation. Okay, that is all levels of transparent, translucent, X-ray through pi. Okay, all setting of operation set tractions. Okay, look what you can see through the eye as you project it, as you see it, and modify it in line position. Okay, it's pretty incredible when you understand that. Okay, so that's what you guys are coming into now. Higher levels of communication, how to use your pi and generation lines of clocking, all through structure, all through design. Okay, and all different angles. Okay, because that's what you're bringing out. You're bringing out of the plasma screen in a box frame. And set positions. Right? But again, remember, it's always happening in the eye itself. Okay? Nothing is happening outside the eye. But what you have to understand, how you create a box, you have to look at this. And what you understand, this expands, this expands. Okay? This expands and this expands. This expands and this expands. Expanding and expanding through the eye. Okay? So this is your longitude, latitude. That just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Right? So you're going to process inside to understand outside, outside to understand pi inside. Understand that inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside, inside, outside. You're creating a propeller through the eye. Now the eye, when it creates its propeller, it starts the engine. When it starts the engine, it's modifying the internal and external force that's running the system of operation. Creating that communication setting creates a Fibonacci. It's that position. When it creates a Fibonacci, it creates its portal, a set lines of travel. Okay, set position of space and time, 1/3 graph line. Only on 1/3 because you're connected to your higher self, formation lines of ground, communication lines, convergence systems, position lines of travel, point lines of graph, calculating, modified, log in space. During line, space, time, correlates, and sending travel, communication, convergence system, all through calculation. Right? So once you create the portal, okay, then you can create a Stargate. But you have to bend space, time, edit space, and locking line screen adaptation of space itself. So it's a higher formation of security panels that you have to process through on travel communications. So that's all the eye is doing, is going through its portals of Stargates through pi. So let's go through this one more time so you can understand the central settings. All right, how you see your eye in spectrum, center operation, 12. Okay, let's start with 4 centers of travel. Okay, the split lines of anomaly. Okay, so you got 2 parametric activation routers, process lines of Fibonacci over screen. Okay, so the time frame is business in here. 1 arrow indicates the north. That's degrees over 98,000 degrees over lines of Fahrenheit in direction. Indicates 1/3 over travel. 1 graph line into 2 over 3 over 4 and 5 center as 6 lines of communication setting. Indicates grounds, propeller over lines into solar graph, central graph, median graph, correlation graph, levitation graph, high travel graph, operation screen graph, and communication. Directing ground centers online on position lines of power. Generates the screen location eye divisions, expanding the expansion of its eye location of its coordination. All through setting, all through operation. Through the track communications of pi itself. All through the eye as spectrum light. Very powerful stuff, guys. And now you can bring it out in frame. Okay, it's extremely powerful when you come in your longitude and latitudes and your lengths and your streaming and your widths. What you're doing inside the eye lines is set lines of communication system that change the seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. You're constantly creating a propeller. You're constantly creating an engine at a different levels of pi. The centralize your system, how you use your seconds, minutes, hours, and frame. That puts all position lines of balance through its flux capacitor, time capacitor, and body capacitor. It's setting up operation, setting lines of never with Fibonacci, routes the routers, and screen adaptation of a solar disk. Operation lines change the frame course centers of time frame. Change another time frame, circulation and rotations, creating another communication lines of nebula. There's nebula. So whatever I say what it is. Because I'm converting my system to its operation setting, how to correlate the communication lines of time frame that change course centers of space-time, its frame itself, that process position location to its VR system. Inside lines of travel, indirect lines of link, that process indicates and setting a center operation of me. What I'm doing through projections. How I'm bringing things out of frame, out of TV, out of sight, out of mind. Okay, thinking outside the box. That's what you get information setting once you understand how to position your systems off their tractions. Okay, it's very powerful stuff what you guys do. All levels of your creations. And that's that position. Okay. Okay, that's what you guys have to understand. So when you're looking, you're seeing everything of a portal. And your metaphysical body travels through it. All right, and as it's traveling, it's going through different levels of pi. Through part of acceleration line connection setting, that process the indication of what you're doing through the life force that puts you in position of your tree of life. Your trees indicate lines when you come to your satellites. Your bushes are communication when it comes in its relays. Knowing how to use that information setting is processing your triangulation and that communication system that puts all communication in its positions. There's operation line connection setting to your setting, which is processing your positions, how you see your satellites of communication. Satellite this way or satellite this way in set position its operation. See, that's what we don't understand. What are actually a simulator is, and how to structure a division, how to see its perspective, how we see lines of communications, all through structure, right? But it's all processing through the eye, guys. See, this is the eye. Different volumes of the eye itself, different levels of the eye itself. Looking through the spectacles of the center of its eye. It's triangulating this way in that position. Okay, so this is what the eye is seeing, see? That's what the eye is seeing. It's seeing this, it's structure. Okay, now let's flick the switch. Now it's going to go in the opposite way. Now it sees the building on this way. Very complicated stuff. See, the structure in 2 lines of signals. So it sees it one way, it sees another way, see? That's the internal, external, and set position where you see the transparent, translucent to the X-ray. Okay, that's through pi. Okay, 2 structure divisions and locations of properties of design, inside and outside and travel. Okay, so it's very powerful. How you see it in all formation sending a flux. So the eye itself is here, looking from above, looking from below at what it sees. All right, what it sees in panels, what it sees in SkyGrid, and what it sees in operation of the settings, all through the eye central lines of its divisions. Okay, interactions. Okay. So as you're seeing through the eye line, you're seeing the structure of the sim. Okay, you're modifying what you're looking at, positional platforms, inside positions here, operations. Okay. So your pi gets a lot more complicated as you're structuring more and more through formulas or algorithms. And what you're doing is you're trying to process that, what you're doing through drawing. Okay, as you see these things, how it sees you in a spectrum, how it sees you in light, how it sees you in shades and shadows, and its void itself, right? So if you understand void, let's get in position VOID. Okay, let's start with that. Now you have to go through a clocking of void, right? Oh, we got an open, so we can't travel through that, right? We got to close the gap. Okay, closing the gap, let's process communication. Now it can travel. Right, so think of in that position, nothing can travel because there's a leak. So you have to close it up, seal it up, right? All right, so we got 2 VAS, 2 volume. Okay, now we work with the pyramid itself. Okay, so you're turning the void into operation of its intelligence, separating lines, position of D factors over screen. Directing ground centers, and remember, it's all inside position. Okay, inside. So inside is outside, outside is in. Processing that position locations, you change the formation lines into void, VAS, and velocity. The process that indicates in setting how you go through 3 central lines of pi. Okay, pi generates lines in 1/3, 1 graph, 1 screen, 1 operation, 1 settings. Process lines of 0 gravity. You can process anything location once you understand how you use your pi, so you can start using letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols through pi, of pi, over pi, under pi. Correlation lines of calculation lines and lacing lines of communication lines of pi. How you see an information system is all in lines of travel. Okay? 3 pi generation lines of screens, 4 centers lines of calculation setting, operation line set, calculation modify. As you look through the eye itself, it tells the time. So as you're looking through the light, that's what your oversoul is seeing through time, through light, guys, as it sees through spectrum of its eye itself. So that's 4 generation lines of pi. Seconds, minutes, hours, and frame. Setting coordinates into a window frame communication of structure. Ground centers on sequence lines of platform to structure locations. There's the grid. See the grid through the eye. Now we create the platform, which is 2 eye divisions, 2 panels operation lines, right over left, left over right. Indicate position of patterns, set course centers, and direct lines of communication. Right? 3 central lines, 4 centers, 5 lines of travel, all through communication. Right? Then we set coordinates, directing ground centers, online center line communications. Okay? Then we set the tone line, operation lines of setting and sequence, in position to its locations, all through set position. Okay? So as we in line centers, we constantly change the eye division in locations. Okay, the eye constantly changes inside. So it's about living the activities of the eye at spectrum. Okay? And the expanding of what you're doing through flux. Constantly changing the webbing, constantly changing the pi, all through direction. Structure of grounds, power generations, skyline grid. Change formations of grounds. Change it again, but you got to change the I division. It can't be in root routers in that same direction, right? Because what you're creating is a propeller of a self-propelling engine that processes circulation rotation, okay? In that directions, in that communication, okay? And you see it in all ways and forms and set position inside itself, inside. What's going on in structure? Okay, setting up the platforms, seeing yourself in the eye, a different coloration of time frame, right here in set positions. That's you. So this is the process of you in the center. Okay, you never leave the center. That's you in the now. The imagination changes everything of its course, of its recourse, that specificates how you see these things. And that puts lines of alteration on its egos that you constantly go through, and the bodies that you go through costumes, and the stories that you constantly keep creating through pi, guys, all through tractions and that positions. Now you can put yourself here, you can put yourself here. But all this is happening inside position. So if you change the angle, you have to change the I sequence. Change it again. Okay? Positive indications over volume, mass. All right? Stay in the right location, right? Change again, change the I setting again. Okay, change the width and screen adaptations. Change the I again, change the structure. You can go in and you can go out at the same time, right? Okay, and you see yourself in that position to its hallways that puts everything all together, how to use yourself as a simulator through pi. Look at that. Whoa. That's a lot of connection setting of activity going in positions. All through setting, all through set fractions. Okay, and set position. Okay? So that's the inside of the eye itself, seeing the eye itself inside the position of operation. All through flux, over pi. All through expanding. So once you understand how to understand these things, then you understand how to live inside the eye spectrum. Okay, and all direct lines of communication. So let's give a brief example, and that line's the screen adaptations. Eyes are the windows of the soul. Eyes equals windows. Windows equals the soul. Soul equals the activation. Activation equals the awakening. Awakening equals the awareness. Okay, so know exactly what you're doing in recourse of 3 centers, 3 tractions, 3 locations, and 4 location. Platforms over line, directing triangulation over screen, 3 centers of calculation, setting of travel. Inside position, outside traction, right? All happening in set lines of recourse inside the eye. Very powerful stuff. And then you modify the system, you bring it on standby. Bring in the lights, bring in the shades, bring in the mass, bring in the width. Lights, edge, and shadows of the pyramid in black and white. Boom. Now, once it's ready to come out, it comes out of the central setting of space-time itself that modifies the time frame and set lines of your portals in sequence in a Stargate screen location system all through time frame. Sets correlates in setting, process lines of 12 over 2. So it's 2, 30 right now in line state location to its set locations, how it sees the spectrum in the now. Okay? So you have to truly understand how to coordinate it through a triangulation interface and travel communication. Okay? There's the intelligence, 2 eyes, and there's the mouth. Okay? Always in a face facade, guys. Always in a face facade. Face recognition. Okay? It's amazing when you understand the coordinates of what you're doing in subpositions. All interactions. Okay, how you see light in travels, how you see light in directions, how you see light shades in the void itself, all through configurations of pattern direction and timeline to put you in colors, lines, of path and locations. It's all through clocking system, right? We clock our system in 3 centers, line, communication, setting. So once you get out of light, shades, and shadows, there is no number, symbol, shape, or set position. Okay? Because it's just not there. It doesn't exist until you bring things in. Now you have full control of your mind, what you're doing in your central setting. Okay? Understanding that in the convergence system, right? So the 4 becomes 43. 34 goes back to 4. So it becomes its own system. And that's where we are in that modifications now through pi. So you have to send a clocking of its pi itself now to identify your pi first. Is always in the now. So how you see time frame is all through light. So it's like you're looking at reflection, but it's not a reflection, it's a refraction. Direct, redirect, balance of setting, right? Clocking system, I division, okay? Here and here, okay? Open from here, open from here. But your center line is the eye itself. The expanding is what you want to come in positions, how to go through the mind imagination. That changes everything of its recourse, of its infrastructure of design. So it operates line condition setting to a V course, a location of flux. Travels point lines of graph and portals of communication system that puts all calc and modify in 1/6 lines of a measure and scale. Process that ending positions in all spectrum and the eye lines of sequence and location. Okay? That's what you have to get in positions of through clocking, through foundations, and through pi. Okay? All in traction. Okay? You see it on this way, but you see it in the other way. It's facing 2 ways in setting. So you're constantly seeing 4 ways in set position of volume, right? So you're seeing the structure this way, this way, this way, this way, all in one position, one spectrum, all through pi, all through generations, all through clocking, all formation of expanding and travel. Okay, it just goes faster and faster, faster and faster, faster. And the more you modify that, the more you understand how to go faster through time. That processes everything over pi. That constantly just goes through time pi itself. So it puts you in a central line communication with balance that gets you in position lines of communications. All right? So there you go. See you in 5.